Peace be up on you. My name's Johann Say Trillion. This is Far As I Can Tell, episode 21, Teenage Jesus. Yeah, man, this is Teenage Jesus. I gotta ask, oddly enough, that's probably the name Jesus ring the most bells on this whole planet. Say what you want about him, the concept, the idea, but it's no denying that that name ring the most on this planet. And yet, so little is known. It's fascinating. And I'm of the notion that things that you really want to know can be found out. And especially now, like in this day and age, it makes sense to me for some clarity to come forth. So all that to say, so far, we've heard some things we've never heard before. I mean, if you're being honest, you ain't never heard this before. These details about this figure like this. And now we coming up on his teenage years. Teen Jesus. We know what a tumultuous time teenage years can be for just ordinary folk. But this dude, this really it's brought me in and up my level of respect for what I thought I knew about this figure. And this is definitely one of them chapters that really pulled me in. So we talking about teenage Jesus. And it's coming from paper 126, the 2 crucial years. This is paper 126, the 2 crucial years. We know he just came back from Jerusalem, which was an eventful trip. It's an eventful time in a young Jewish dude's life, period, when you turn 13, because you're considered a young man and they take that shit serious. And so he's been consecrated by the law. He's a citizen of Israel. And he's already said he got to be about his father's business at 13. Now we're coming up on 14, the 2 crucial years. I'm going to start at the top of all Jesus's earth life experiences. The 14th and 15th years were the most crucial. That's saying a lot, nah. I mean, we know a little something about them anyway. And what they saying is of all Jesus's earth life experiences, the 14th and 15th years were the most crucial. These 2 years after he began to be self-conscious of divinity and destiny, and before he achieved a large measure of communication with his indwelling adjuster, that fragment of our paradise father that indwells us all, that adjuster. So they said these 2 years after he began to be self-conscious of divinity and destiny, and before he achieved a large measure of communication with his indwelling adjuster, were the most trying of his eventful life on Urantia. It is this period of 2 years which should be called the great test, the real temptation. No human youth, in passing through the early confusions and adjustment problems of adolescence, ever experienced a more crucial testing than that which Jesus passed through during his transition from childhood to young manhood. This important period in Jesus' youthful development began with the conclusion of the Jerusalem visit and with his return to Nazareth. At first, Mary was happy in the thought that she had her boy back once more, that Jesus had returned home to be a dutiful son, not that he was ever anything else, and that he would henceforth be more responsive to her plans for his future life. But she was not for long to bask in this sunshine of maternal delusion and unrecognized family pride. Very soon she was to be more completely disillusioned. More and more the boy was in the company of his father. Less and less did he come to her with his problems, while increasingly both his parents failed to comprehend his frequent alternation between the affairs of this world and the contemplation of his relation to his father's business. Frankly, they did not understand him, but they did truly love him. As he grew older, Jesus' pity and love for the Jewish people deepened, but with the passing years, there developed in his mind a growing righteous resentment of the presence in the Father's temple of the politically appointed priests. Jesus had great respect for the sincere Pharisees and the honest scribes, but he held the hypocritical Pharisees and the dishonest theologians in great contempt. He looked with disdain upon all those religious leaders who were not sincere. When he scrutinized the leadership of Israel, he was sometimes tempted to look with favor on the possibility of his becoming the Messiah of Jewish expectation, but he never yielded to such temptation. As explained, a lot of these Jews are expecting a Jewish Messiah. They want somebody that's going to rally up the people, the Jews, and overthrow these Romans and have some political power in this world, worldly power. That's what they were looking for. A lot of them were looking for when they wanted somebody to sit on the throne of David. And so that was the idea of a lot of people's idea of what the Messiah should be. The story of his exploits among the wise men of the temple in Jerusalem was gratifying to all Nazareth, especially to his former teachers in the synagogue school. For a time, his praise was on everybody's lips. All the village recounted his childhood wisdom and praiseworthy conduct and predicted that he was destined to become a great leader in Israel. At last, a really great teacher was to come out of Nazareth in Galilee, and they all looked forward to the time when he would be 15 years of age so that he might be permitted regularly to read the scriptures in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Now, mind you, we went over how he's always kind of expressed, he's been real nonchalant about people's plans for him, including his parents. And they're kind of like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to be taught in Jerusalem? But he's just never had that inclination. This is part one, his 14th year, AD 8. Part one. This is the calendar year of his 14th birthday. He had become a good yoke maker and worked well, with both canvas and leather. He was also rapidly developing into an expert carpenter and cabinet maker. This summer, he made frequent trips to the top of the hill to the northwest of Nazareth for prayer and meditation. He was gradually becoming more self-conscious of the nature of his bestowal on earth. I'm going to skip down a little bit. He continued to carry on his advanced courses of reading under the synagogue teachers, and he also continued with the home education of his brothers and sisters as they grew up to suitable ages. Early this year, Joseph arranged to set aside the income from his Nazareth and Capernaum property to pay for Jesus' long course of study at Jerusalem. So basically, Joseph is putting money aside, getting ready for Jesus to go to Jerusalem to study up under these rabbis, because that's pretty much the path a teacher would take in his day and age. It having been planned that he should go to Jerusalem in August of the following year when he would be 15 years of age. By the beginning of this year, both Joseph and Mary entertained frequent doubts about the destiny of their firstborn son. He was indeed a brilliant and lovable child, but he was so difficult to understand, so hard to fathom. And again, nothing extraordinary or miraculous ever happened. Man, I just got to pause real quick and just think about what's going on, man. These are earthly parents, man. Joseph and Mary were of this earth, and this was 2,000 years ago. And man, they gave birth to the creator. They gave physical birth to the creator of our local universe. Somebody who's been around up on high 40 billion years. It's something to think about. Scores of times had his proud mother stood in breathless anticipation, expecting to see her son engage in some superhuman or miraculous performance, but always were her hopes dashed down in cruel disappointment. And all this was discouraging, even disheartening. Even disheartening. The devout people of those days truly believed that prophets and men of promise always demonstrated their calling and established their divine authority by performing miracles and working wonders. But Jesus did none of these things. Wherefore was the confusion of his parents steadily increased as they contemplated his future. The improved economic condition of the Nazareth family was reflected in many ways about the home, and especially in the increased number of smooth white boards which were used as writing slates, the writing being done with charcoal. Jesus was also permitted to resume his music lessons. He was very fond of playing the harp. Throughout this year, it can truly be said that Jesus was, quote, grew in favor with man and with God. The prospects of the family seemed good. The future was bright. Part 2. The death of Joseph. All did go well until that fateful day of Tuesday, September 25, when a runner from Sepphoris brought to this Nazareth home the tragic news that Joseph had been severely injured by the falling of a derrick while at work on the governor's residence. A derrick is like one of them big like cranes with a beam that hoists things up in the air. The messenger from Sepphoris had stopped at the shop on the way to Joseph's home, informing Jesus of his father's accident, and they went together to the house to break the sad news to Mary. Jesus desired to go immediately to his father, but Mary would hear to nothing but that she must hasten to her husband's side. She directed that James, then 10 years of age, he was the one behind Jesus. She directed that James, then 10 years of age, should accompany her to Sepphoris while Jesus remained home with the younger children until she should return, as she did not know how seriously Joseph had been injured. But Joseph died of his injuries before Mary arrived. They brought him to Nazareth, and on the following day he was laid to rest with his fathers. Just at the time when prospects were good and the future looked bright, an apparently cruel hand struck down the head of this Nazareth household. The affairs of this home were disrupted, and every plan for Jesus and his future education was demolished. This carpenter lad, now just past 14 years of age, awakened to the realization that he had not only to fulfill the commission of his heavenly Father to reveal the divine nature on earth and in the flesh, but that his young human nature must also shoulder the responsibility of caring for his widowed brother, for his widowed mother and 7 brothers and sisters, and another yet to be born. Mary was pregnant. This lad of Nazareth now became the sole support and comfort of this so suddenly bereaved family. Thus were permitted those occurrences of the natural order of events on Urantia, which would force this young man of destiny so early to assume these heavy but highly educational and disciplinary responsibilities attendant upon becoming the head of a human family, of becoming father to his own brothers and sisters, of supporting and protecting his mother, of functioning as guardian of his father's home, the only home he was to know while on this world. It's a trip, man. It's like their tone is like, yeah, the bright side of it, it made him a man. For real, for real. Damn. Jesus cheerfully accepted the responsibilities so suddenly thrust upon him, and he carried them faithfully to the end. At least one great problem and anticipated difficulty in his life had been tragically solved. He would not now be expected to go to Jerusalem to study under the rabbis. It remained always true that Jesus, quote, sat at no man's feet. He was ever willing to learn from even the humblest of little children, but he never derived authority to teach truth from human sources. So, like I said, he always had this, he wasn't feeling studying up under these rabbis. And now, as they say, this problem has been tragically solved. But on top of that, he didn't derive any authority to teach what he taught from man, which ended up being one of the reasons he was so hated. Still, he knew nothing of the Gabriel visit to his mother before his birth. He only learned of this from John on the day of his baptism at the beginning of his public ministry. As the years passed, this young carpenter of Nazareth increasingly measured every institution of society and every usage of religion by the unvarying test. What does it do for the human soul? Does it bring God to man? Does it bring man to God? While this youth did not wholly neglect the recreational and social aspects of life, more and more he devoted his time and energies to just two purposes: the care of his family and the preparation to do his Father's heavenly will on earth. This year, it became the custom for the neighbors to drop in during the winter evenings to hear Jesus play upon the harp, to listen to his stories, for the lad was a master storyteller, and to hear him read from the Greek scriptures. The economic affairs of the family continued to run fairly smoothly, as there was quite a sum of money on hand at the time of Joseph's death. Jesus early demonstrated the possession of keen business judgment and financial sagacity. He was liberal but frugal. He was saving but generous. He proved to be a wise and efficient administrator of his father's estate. But in spite of all that Jesus and the Nazareth neighbors could do to bring cheer into the home, Mary and even the children were overcast with sadness. Joseph was gone. Joseph was an unusual husband and father, and they all missed him. And it seemed all the more tragic to think that he died ere they could speak to him or hear his farewell blessing. Part 3, the 15th year, AD 9. By the middle of this 15th year, and we are reckoning time in accordance with the 20th century calendar, not by the Jewish year, Jesus had taken a firm grasp upon the management of his family. 15, man. He got to raise 8 brothers and sisters practically and support Mary. And he's the sole head of, he's the sole support financially for his family at 15. Before this year had passed, their savings had about disappeared, and they were face to face with the necessity of disposing of one of the Nazareth houses which Joseph and his neighbor Jacob owned in partnership. On Wednesday evening, April 17th, AD 9, Ruth, the baby of the family, was born. And to the best of his ability, Jesus endeavored to take the place of his father in comforting and ministering to his mother during this trying and peculiarly sad ordeal. For almost a score of years until he began his public ministry, no father could have loved and nurtured his daughter any more affectionately and faithfully than Jesus cared for little Ruth. And he was an equally good father to all the members of his family. Yes, he was their brother, but he the one that got to lay down the law now. He is the male head of household to his widowed mother of 8. Like, yeah, he's their father, and he's definitely, even though he's a brother, technically the only father that Ruth ever knew. He raised her as though that was his daughter, practically. So it's a trip, man. It's like Michael had to come down here, man, and really live and learn, man. Like, that was his whole point of choosing to come down here. That's the whole point of these bestowal missions, to learn and become your creation, to really go through what they go through so he can be tried and tested in every way as we are. And so this unfortunate accident actually enabled him to be a father, which is something a lot of us end up doing, is becoming parents. So it's a trip. During this year, Jesus first formulated the prayer which he subsequently taught to his apostles, and which to many has become known as the Lord's Prayer. In a way, it was an evolution of the family altar. They had many forms of praise and several formal prayers. After his father's death, Jesus tried to teach the older children to express themselves individually in prayer, much as he so enjoyed doing. But they could not grasp his thought and would invariably fall back upon their memorized prayer forms. So, they had a set way of saying prayers, and he's trying to get them to talk to our Heavenly Father in a more conversational tone, and it's not clicking with a lot of people back then, because the whole fatherhood ideal concept really of God hadn't really been looked upon it that way. It was in this effort to stimulate his older brothers and sisters to say individual prayers that Jesus would endeavor to lead them along by suggestive phrases, and presently, without intention on his part, it developed that they were all using a form of prayer which was largely built up from these suggestive lines which Jesus had taught them. Let's skip down. This year, Jesus was much troubled with confused thinking. Family responsibility had quite effectively removed all thought of immediately carrying out any plan for responding to the Jerusalem visitation, directing him to be about his father's business. What they're alluding to is what happened. Before his first visit to Jerusalem, a messenger appeared to him, some celestial being, and gave him a message to be about his father's business. And so now he's, contemplating that, but he's thinking about, like, I got a family to take care of right now. They need me. Jesus rightly reasoned that the watch care of his earthly father's family must take precedence of all duties, that the support of his family must become his first obligation. In the course of this year, Jesus found a passage in the so-called Book of Enoch, which influenced him in the later adoption of the term, quote, Son of Man, as a designation for his bestowal mission on Urantia. He had thoroughly considered the idea of the Jewish Messiah and was firmly convinced that he was not to be that Messiah. He longed to help his father's people, but he never expected to lead Jewish armies in overthrowing the foreign domination of Palestine. He knew he would never sit on the throne of David at Jerusalem. Neither did he believe that his mission was that of a spiritual deliverer or moral teacher solely to the Jewish people. In no sense, therefore, could his life mission be the fulfillment of the intense longings and supposed messianic prophecies of the Hebrew scriptures, at least not as the Jews understood these predictions of the prophets. Likewise, he was certain he was never to appear as the Son of Man depicted by the prophet Daniel. But when the time came for him to go forth as a world teacher, what would he call himself? What claims should he make concerning his mission? By what name would he be called by the people who would become believers in his teachings? While turning all these problems over in his mind, he found in the synagogue library at Nazareth, among the apocalyptic books which he had been studying, this manuscript called the Book of Enoch. Damn, he had access to the Book of Enoch. And though he was certain that it had not been written by Enoch of old, it proved very intriguing to him, and he read and reread it many times. There was one passage which particularly impressed him, a passage in which this term Son of Man appeared. The writer of the so-called Book of Enoch went on to tell about the Son of Man, describing the work he would do on earth and explaining that this Son of Man, before coming down on this earth to bring salvation to mankind, had walked through the courts of heavenly glory with his Father, the Father of all, and that he had turned his back upon all this grandeur and glory to come down on earth to proclaim salvation to needy mortals. It sounds a lot like what Michael has done. As Jesus would read these passages, well understanding that much of the Eastern mysticism which had become admixed with these teachings was erroneous, he responded in his heart and recognized in his mind that all of these messianic predictions of the Hebrew scriptures and all of these theories about the Jewish deliverer, none were so near the truth as this story tucked away in this partially accredited Book of Enoch. And he then and there decided to adopt as his inaugural title the Son of Man. And this he did when he subsequently began his public work. I'm going to skip down a little bit. By this time, he had quite thoroughly settled. They talking about what this boy is contemplating at 15 years, 14, 15 years of age. These are the things he's thinking about. Like, how am I going to present myself to the world when I really got to do what I came here to do? I got to take care of my father's family first. But when that time comes, whenever it may be, how am I going to announce myself to the world? He's branding himself. By this time, he had quite thoroughly settled many things about his forthcoming work for the world, but he said nothing of these matters to his mother, who still had held stoutly to the idea of his being the Jewish Messiah. The great confusion of Jesus' younger days now arose. Having settled something about the nature of his mission on earth to be about his Father's business, to show forth his Father's loving nature to all mankind, he began to ponder anew the many statements in the scriptures referring to the coming of a national deliverer, a Jewish teacher or king. To what event did these prophecies refer? Was not he a Jew? Or was he? Was he or was he not of the house of David? His mother averred he was. His father had ruled that he was not. He decided he was not. But had the prophets confused the nature of the Messiah, nature and mission of the Messiah? After all, could it be possible that his mother was right? In most matters, when differences of opinion had arisen in the past, she had been right. If he were a new teacher and not the Messiah, then how should he recognize the Jewish Messiah if such a one should appear in Jerusalem during the time of his earth mission? And further, what should be his relation to this Jewish Messiah, and what should uh, and what should be his relation after embarking on his life mission to his family, to the Jewish commonwealth and religion, to the Roman Empire, to the Gentiles and their religions. Each of these momentous problems this young Galilean turned over in his mind and seriously pondered while he continued to work at the carpenter's bench, laboriously making a living for himself, his mother, and 8 other hungry mouths. Damn. Before the end of this year, Mary saw the family funds diminishing. She turned the sale of doves over to James. Presently, they brought a second cow, and with the aid of Miriam, they began the sale of milk to their Nazareth neighbors. Miriam is the oldest girl. His profound periods of meditation, his frequent journeys to the hilltop for prayer, and the many strange ideas which Jesus advanced from time to time thoroughly alarmed his mother. Sometimes she thought the lad was beside himself, and then she would steady her fears, remembering that he was, after all, a child of promise and in some manner different from other youths. But Jesus was learning not to speak of all his thoughts, not to present all his ideas to the world, not even to his own mother. From this year on, Jesus' disclosures about what was going on in his mind steadily diminished. That is, he talked less about those things which an average person could not grasp, and which would lead to his being regarded as peculiar or different from ordinary folks. Man, it just he had a whole lot in, man. It's crazy, like the tightrope he had to walk, man. It's something else. To all appearances, he became commonplace and conventional, though he did long for someone who could understand his problem. He craved a trustworthy and confidential friend, but his problems were too complex for his human associates to comprehend. The uniqueness of the unusual situation compelled him to bear his burdens alone. This is a teenager with the weight of the universe on his shoulders. Literally, figuratively, the weight of the universe was on this dude's shoulders, man. 4. This is part 4, first sermon in the synagogue. With the coming of his 15th birthday, Jesus could officially occupy the synagogue pulpit on the Sabbath day. Many times before, in the absence of speakers, Jesus had been asked to read the scriptures, but now the day had come when, according to law, he could conduct the service. Therefore, on the first Sabbath after his 15th birthday, the Chazan arranged for Jesus to conduct the morning service of the synagogue. And when all the faithful in Nazareth had assembled, the young man, having made his selection of scriptures, stood up and began to read. It's so much, but again, this is paper, not so much, but this is paper 126. He started off pulling from the book of Isaiah, chapter 61. But there's some beautiful passages he reads, but I'm gonna skip down. And when he had thus read, he sat down, and the people went to their homes, pondering over the words which he had so graciously read to them. Never had his townspeople seen him so magnificently solemn. Never had they heard his voice so earnest and so sincere. Never had they observed him so manly and decisive, so authoritative. He was already well respected in his town of Nazareth. You know, he was a real upstanding young man, and they seen him in a different light. Like, whoa. And this Sabbath afternoon, Jesus climbed the Nazareth Hill with James, and when they returned home, wrote out the 10 Commandments in Greek on 2 smooth boards in charcoal. Subsequently, Martha colored and decorated these boards, and for long they hung on the wall over James's small workbench. Part 5, the financial struggle. Gradually, Jesus and his family returned to the simple life of their earlier years. Their clothes and even their food became simpler. They had plenty of milk, butter, and cheese. In season, they enjoyed the produce of their garden, but each passing month necessitated the practice of greater frugality. Their breakfasts were very plain. They saved their best food for the evening meal. However, among these Jews, lack of wealth did not imply social inferiority. Already had this youth well nigh encompassed the comprehension of how men lived in his day, and how well he understood life in the home, field, and workshop is shown by his subsequent teachings, which so repletely reveal his intimate contact with all phases of human experience. Yeah, they pretty much saying he had a whole lot of game about himself because he had so much experience. And that's why he could relay such heavy messages in such a simple manner, simple and relatable manner, because he done some, he really know mankind. He done lived the life. Like a real Mac of all trades. The Nazareth Chazon continued to cling to the belief that Jesus was to become a great teacher, probably the successor of the renowned Gamaliel at Jerusalem, whoever that was. Apparently, all Jesus' plans for a career were thwarted. The future did not look bright as matters now developed. But he did not falter. He was not discouraged. He lived on, day by day, doing well the present duty and faithfully discharging the immediate responsibilities of his station in life. Jesus' life is the everlasting comfort of all disappointed idealists. Man, I can relate. Like, you can have some pictures in your mind, like, man, I know that's coming, but you just trudging along day by day in order to get there. And he had to do the same thing. The pay of a common day laboring carpenter was slowly diminishing. By the end of this year, Jesus could earn, by working early and late, only the equivalent of about 25 cents a day. By the next year, they found it difficult to pay the civil taxes, not to mention the synagogue assessments and the temple tax of 1/2 shekel. During this year, the tax collector tried to squeeze extra revenue out of Jesus, even threatening to take his heart. Them bill collectors and the taxes, they just piling up, man. Fearing that the copy of the Greek scriptures might be discovered and confiscated by the tax collectors, Jesus, on his 15th birthday, presented it to the Nazareth synagogue library as his maturity offering to the Lord. Now remember, these are the scriptures that were given to him and his family when he was a baby in Alexandria, Egypt. A couple presented this to him, or I think some of Zacharias's people, or maybe it was some of Joseph's family, friends, or whoever. They presented these Greek scriptures to him, and that was a big deal. It wasn't a lot of them floating around, so it had a lot of value. The great shock of his 15th year came when Jesus went over to Sepphoris to receive the decision of Herod. Herod is the king of Judea at this time. To receive the decision of Herod regarding the appeal taken to him in the dispute about the money due Joseph at the time of his accidental death. Jesus and Mary had hoped for the receipt of a considerable sum of money when the treasurer at Sepphoris had offered them a paltry amount. So it's pretty much like this is a death, man. It was some sort of negligence probably or something. It's like, I don't even know what's beyond workers' comp. Like they expecting some insurance money, so to say. Jesus and Mary had hoped for the receipt of a considerable sum of money when the treasurer at Sepphoris had offered them a paltry amount. Joseph's brothers had taken an appeal to Herod himself, and now Jesus stood in the palace and heard Herod decree that his father had nothing due him at the time of his death. And for such an unjust decision, Jesus never again trusted Herod Antipas. It is not surprising that he once alluded to Herod as that fox. The close work at the carpenter's bench during this and subsequent years deprived Jesus of the opportunity of mingling with the caravan passengers. The family supply shop had already been taken over by his uncle, and Jesus worked altogether in the home shop, where he was near to help Mary with the family. About this time, he began sending James up to the camel lot to gather information about world events, and thus he sought to keep in touch with the news of the day. So he was too busy to do some things he loved now, and he was pretty much tied to that workbench at the carpentry shop. As he grew up to manhood, he passed through all those conflicts and confusions which the average young persons of previous and subsequent ages have undergone, and the rigorous experience of supporting his family was a sure safeguard against his having overmuch time for idle meditation or the indulgence of mystic tendencies. This was the year that Jesus rented a considerable piece of land just to the north of their home, which was divided up as a family garden plot. Each of the older children had an individual garden, and they entered into keen competition in their agricultural efforts. The eldest brother spent some time with them in the garden each day during the season of vegetable cultivation. As Jesus worked with his younger brothers and sisters in the garden, he many times entertained the wish that they were all located on a farm out in the country where they could enjoy the liberty and freedom of an unhampered life. But they did not find themselves growing up in the country. And Jesus, being a thoroughly practical youth as well as an idealist, intelligently and vigorously attacked his problem just as he found it, and did everything within his power to adjust himself and his family to the realities of their situation and to adapt their condition to the highest possible satisfaction of their individual and collective longings. At one time, Jesus faintly hoped that he might be able to gather up sufficient means, provided they could collect the considerable sum of money due his father for work on Herod's palace, to warrant undertaking the purchase of a small farm. He had really given serious thought to this plan of moving his family out into the country. But when Herod refused to pay them any of the funds due Joseph, they gave up the ambition of owning a home in the country. As it was, they contrived to enjoy much of the experience of farm life, as they now had 3 cows, 4 sheep, a flock of chickens, a donkey, and a dog, in addition to the doves. Even the little tots had their regular duties to perform in the well-regulated scheme of management which characterized the home of this Nazareth family. With the close of this 15th year, Jesus completed the traversal of that dangerous and difficult period in human existence, that time of transition between the more complacent years of childhood and the consciousness of approaching manhood with its increased responsibilities and opportunities for the acquirement of advanced experience in the development of a noble character. The growth period for mind and body had ended, and now began the real career of this young man of Nazareth. And that is the end of paper 126, titled The Two Crucial Years. And I say that was crucial, man. He lost his father, Joseph, good, solid dude, head of a large household, lost him to an accident. And now Jesus, having already been told it's time to be about his heavenly father's business, now must take care of a family of 8 and his widowed mother. And he was only 14 when it started. Yeah, man. Much respect. But this is part 1 of Teenage Jesus.